Today, we're going to talk about how to advance your key workplace initiatives while minimizing your legal risk. Keeping workers engaged and purpose-driven is an important part of HR's job, but so is keeping your company out of court because of legal pitfalls related to the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and the Fair Labor Standards Act, and more. To give you that ever-important legal perspective on the hot topics of DE&I, hybrid work, and cultural competency, we've called in Katherin Nukk-Freeman, attorney and co-founder of the Nukk-Freeman Cerra PC. Today, our guest is Katherin Nukk-Freeman. Katherin is the co-founder and president of Shift HR Compliance Training and the co-founding partner of Nukk-Freeman Cerra, the largest women-owned employment law firm on the East Coast. She is a passionate advocate for building better workplaces and has dedicated her career to working with clients to proactively address and effectively manage workplace issues. As a dynamic employment law advisor, training instructor, and industry thought leader, Katherin is a highly sought-after speaker, and for the past 5 years has also served on the board of directors of Connect One Bank. Katherin, welcome to Voices of HR.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Well, I am too, and I have been thinking about this all day because what you do and how you help companies avoid risk is something that I think is not talked about enough, particularly in the HR space. So let's start here. So over the past 30 years, you have helped companies of all sizes adhere to the law. And along the way, you became this highly sought after expert on DE&I training. So legally speaking, where are companies at risk when implementing initiatives, including DE&I, in their workplace?
So it's a great question. And, it's interesting because I know we're starting the conversation talking about risk and managing risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the risks is not moving forward with DE&I initiatives because nowadays, as they like to say, culture eats so many other initiatives for breakfast. And so if you don't have an organization where you're building the culture of the organization, whether it's through DEI initiatives and otherwise, you're not going to have a successful organization. So that's one of the risks, not engaging in these initiatives. And right, exactly. And then another risk, if you are implementing DEI initiatives, is that you're not implementing them in a consistent way. That's, often a pitfall that some employers have. And then I guess I'd say the next most common risk, if you're moving forward with your DEI plans, is that you are using them as a requirement and a mandate as opposed to a goal that your organization is seeking to achieve.
I can absolutely see that because I think companies realize that they do need to move forward. And I think now so many feel that they're behind, that they do have to put mandates in place, that they do have to maybe, overlook some other candidates in order to fill what I think HR is feeling is their quota. And so that's why I can't wait to talk to you more about this because I think every company should want to fulfill D&I initiatives because it just brings bottom line results. I mean, that's been proven year after year. But here's my pervasive confusion on the topic. And that's that companies can build rocket ships that take us into outer space. We can deliver technology that permeates cancerous tumors with pinpoint accuracy. But we have not yet cracked the nut on DE&I. And so in your experience, what is the root cause? Like, why are companies not moving forward? And does it harken back to senior executives not putting this on the top of their list as a key initiative? Is it for some other nefarious reason? What are the reasons why companies aren't moving forward?
That's a great question. And in my experience, rarely do I see malicious intent involved in terms of why DEI isn't focused on. I think it's more a question of understanding, understanding
Mm.
and empathy. For example, there are many business leaders who don't, to your point, understand how successful DEI initiatives really improve the bottom line, create
Mm.
more profitability, create more retention, more productivity, and all of those things. They are just not aware of it because they haven't studied it and no one's brought it to their attention. And if they were aware, it's really hard to argue with the statistics that show how beneficial DEI initiatives are for organizations. So I think lack of awareness is one. I think that kind of ties in with leadership's blind spots. They may not realize the importance of these initiatives. And I also think there's sometimes a lack of empathy amongst leaders and organizations, and when you don't really understand how certain segments of your employee population are feeling, that they're not feeling included, they're not feeling welcome, they're not feeling appreciated, whatever the case may be, then you're much less likely to take action to alleviate those issues. So if you were a little bit more aware, a little bit more sensitized, that again would help solve that problem. And then go back to what I was initially saying, really, really solidifying the corporate culture and strengthening it in a way that that everyone wants their culture to be strengthened.
Yeah, I always find it interesting because in my book, which was Shift, which ironically your training company is Shift, and so is my book. We're shifting all over the place here. Um, what we talk about in that book is that what my research showed was that companies do have good intent, that they do want to hire for diversity, but they aren't changing the culture to actually invite them in, to invite them, to include them. And therefore, you almost have this situation where the intent is good, but the execution is so incredibly poor. And they aren't changing so that the culture is inclusive. So, how often, I would suspect then, because a lot of the book is around the challenges and the conflict that ensues within the workplace because of this. How often are companies running into legal battles due to their DE&I initiatives not really being thought through to the degree that maybe they should be?
That's a good question too. You're full of amazing
Well,
questions,
I've been
Joyce.
thinking about this. I've been thinking
You
about
can
this
tell. You can tell for a long time.
for a long time.
Um, you know, I think um I think it's more risky for the companies not to have the DEI programs. And I think that's when there are more legal battles. But if we
Mm.
really were looking at, okay, what are the legal battles that companies run into as it relates to their DEI initiatives? I see it being not necessarily the cause of litigation or a complaint being filed, but how a DEI initiative, for example, take training, how that could end up being a
Mm.
problem if it's not done by the most professional and experienced companies or individuals. So, say, for example, a situation where a company brings in a DEI trainer and they have a room full of managers and they're talking about issues within the company that need to be resolved and experiences people have had and what types of discrimination those individuals may have experienced at the
Mhm.
organization or seen. All of a sudden, if people are disclosing that information, none of that is deemed attorney client privilege. So, what that means is if there is a harassment lawsuit or discrimination lawsuit in a few months or years, they can come back and bring the substance of those conversations into the lawsuit as proof that the company knew this was going on, that these were examples of what was happening. So, you really have to handle those training sessions in a way where you still accomplish your goal, which is to raise and resolve issues and challenges and set goals, but not necessarily let a conversation go in a direction that would be problematic for the organization down the road.
That makes perfect sense. And I suspect a lot of our HR pros know that there's risks anytime you bring anyone in for training. Um, and obviously, it also has to comply with your own policies and what you're trying to accomplish with your culture. Now, you also, let's flip this around to a positive note too. You also work with companies to bring their DE&I up to the next level. So, what should companies be doing right? Like, what are some ways to execute DE&I the right way so that they do avoid any legal risks?
Right. Well, there are a number of things organizations can do if they really want to have effective DEI policies that aren't exposing them to unnecessary risk. And I guess just sort of starting backwards, once they've come up with their plan and their program, they want to make sure that their internal counsel or perhaps outsourced counsel really takes a look at their initiatives and makes
Mm,
sure that it is compliant with employment law. I mean, the way I look at it is I'm fortunate enough to wear multiple hats. So I've been an employment attorney for almost 30 years. And so I have that kind of legal analysis hat that I wear. I've
mm,
also worked with HR leaders for that long. So
mm,
I understand HR's goals with respect to initiatives. And then more recently, within the past 7 years or so, I've worked with DEI professionals. So you need to make sure that the DEI professionals are not the end all with
mhm.
your DEI plans, but that they also work collaboratively with their HR counterparts and then certainly their in-house counsel. And then when you can get that program running from all different perspectives, that's when you're going to be able to rest much more easy that you've got hopefully an effective program that's going to accomplish your goals, but not increase the risk of the organization.
So, put a lot of effort into the planning and really be proactive in thinking about the downside risk and also the upside potential of the plan, I think is what I'm
Exactly.
hearing you. Okay. And
Exactly.
so can we just talk a little bit more about employment law around DE&I? Is there anything that our HR pros need to keep in mind as they're putting this plan together that they should kind of keep in their back of in the back of their mind, thinking, okay, I remember Katherin said this on the podcast. I need to keep this in mind and I need to implement it and put it into my plan.
Mhm. Well, one of the most important things, and I alluded to it earlier, is that these plans have to be aspirational. So
Mhm.
you want to be setting goals and not mandates. There's no legitimate legal quota. So you can have goals and that's what you're looking to do. Another way of accomplishing that is, especially in the hiring context, for example,
Mm,
you want the language to be about casting a wider web, casting a
mm,
wider net so that you can bring in more candidates from more diverse backgrounds, knowing that you're going to hire
mhm.
the most qualified candidate and you're
Right.
not going to hire that candidate because of their race or their sex or their national origin or whatever the case may be, but you just happen to be looking in so many other areas that perhaps you haven't looked before, so that you're going to be able to consider more and more diverse candidates in order to get you to that most qualified candidate, which hopefully gets you to that goal of diversifying your workforce as opposed to the mandate that you're doing so. So you don't want leaders saying, this next leadership position needs to be filled by a woman or a Black
Mm,
person or a person with a disability. You want them to say, we want to make sure more women are considered and
mhm.
more people with disabilities are considered and more people with this racial background are considered so that we can hire the best possible candidate.
Yes, because I always think about DE&I as something that we should all aspire to do within our organizations, but there already were laws in place before DE&I kind of became this thing that everybody should do, right? And it was
Mhm.
all about discrimination, and you cannot discriminate based upon race, sex, national origin, right? All of those things. So you would think the flip
Right.
side would be you can't hire just because of that either.
Right. Right. Yeah. And the bottom line is you can't make, when we're talking about employment law,
Mhm.
you can't make employment decisions based on someone's protected category.
Mm.
So that means you can't make a decision whether to hire or not hire somebody, or promote or not promote somebody based on their sex, race, religion, national origin, disability, and the list goes on. You just can't make the decision on that basis.
Mm-hmm.
And you're exactly right. Those concepts are rooted in the employment laws, both federal and state, and even local, which have been in existence for a long time now.
So if we have some HR pros who are listening right now and they're saying, "Oh no, okay, I put my plan together. I did not take this into account because I hadn't listened to this podcast yet. I have a DEI plan, and I think I need to go make some changes." If an employer does run into a legal battle with their current DE&I initiatives, what should they do next? I mean, I think one solution is go ahead and change up your plan based upon what we're talking about today. But let's just say it does go down the wrong path and they're in legal trouble. What should they do?
So I am a very proactive person. So I would almost take a step back and say, for those who haven't put their plan together yet, please, please, please get the appropriate counsel, because it would be so much easier not to have to backtrack after there's been a challenge. So if you haven't established your plans, make sure you get counsel with that perspective of employment law, HR, and DEI. If you've already started and the horse is out of the barn, then, and there is an issue and you're challenged, then you want to get counsel and experts involved right away to help you revise what you might have done inappropriately. And it's probably going to be small tweaks here and there, the language from quota to goal and that sort of thing. But I would encourage you not to throw out your DEI plan altogether, because then you're going to be moving backwards.
Right.
I would just look at what you have, make the changes so that they help you accomplish your goals, which are worthy goals, which are noble goals, and which are going to help your organization be successful, and just do it in a way that's compliant, so that, again, you're decreasing the risk, increasing the benefit to your organization and to every person working in it.
So at the top of the hour, we both were talking about culture and how important culture is. And I think every single podcast guest that we've had on thus far has talked about the importance of culture. We had Dawn Zier on a couple weeks ago, and, as prior CEO of Nutrisystem, she talked about culture, that culture was the success of their turnaround. I think it was 2 times the revenue and 7 times the profit. And she gave all the credit to the culture and the people. You have talked about this notion around cultural competency for organizations who want to embrace DE&I. Can you tell us a little bit more about that terminology, what it is, and why it helps organizations execute DE&I?
Absolutely. Cultural competency is really an understanding of the backgrounds of your employees within the organization. And it's not just cultural backgrounds like relating to foreign countries, but culture can be related to geographical areas in the US, whether it's employees from the South versus the North versus the Midwest. Culture can be with respect to how somebody was raised within their family, and based on their heritage, and based on their national origin, and based on their race. There's so many different types of culture. And what the studies have really shown is that the greater understanding people, and of course employees are people have with respect to their colleagues, their coworkers, their neighbors, and their cultural background, the better they'll be able to communicate with one another, the better they'll be able to collaborate with one another, the more they'll want to work with one another. And it's all additive. So it's really one of those concepts that's gaining a lot of momentum. For example, I never used to train on the topic of cultural competency before, but now we're getting asked all the time to go even deeper than understanding unconscious bias, but understanding the importance of cultural competency and really how you can develop it within your organization and amongst your employees.
I think that is so interesting, and it's such an advanced concept from the standpoint of, I think the easy answer in the past has always been different country, different ethnic origin. But I have to say, when I moved from the Midwest to the East Coast, that was a huge cultural shift.
Absolutely.
The organization that I worked in, I mean, the East Coast is very fast paced and very different than I think Midwest. So very interesting and advanced concept that you train on and that HR needs to keep in mind.
You raise the difference between the Midwest and the East Coast. I was listening to someone who was talking about how they had a culturally diverse team of people, and it's something I never really thought about, who had a different concept of time and what was considered to be on time. And so you have certain countries who consider somebody to be perfectly on time when they're 20 minutes late. And then other countries who consider somebody to be late if they're exactly on time. And so you're right, like the little things you might not even consider. And I could see that being true to your point about the Midwest being a little bit slower paced than the East Coast. You could see how you might have a boss who thinks, well, that employee is lacking a sense of urgency, when really they're operating in a way that they were raised or worked initially in a different paced culture than what they're now in New York City.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's interesting about the time concept,
Right.
because that's so true. I mean, when you go to the South, things may be a little bit more friendlier, slower paced. Still obviously very impactful, but you're absolutely right. So I think you have given us so much valuable information and ideas around how to create and implement a DE&I initiative. But one other thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on was post-COVID return to work and the hybrid work environment. And something else that you've been seeing a lot is that employers who are still trying to figure out how to make hybrid workplaces more effective. What do you think is the most common problems, either legally or not, that they're running into? And any tips on how to think about it or how to resolve it?
One of the biggest issues that I'm sure everybody on this podcast is going to agree with is, how do we get people to want to come back to work?
Absolutely.
And I should say to the office,
Right.
because everybody has been working,
Yes, they have.
and many organizations have been just as productive with employees working from home as in the office. But many leaders are also eager to get their teams back in person because they believe there's a value to people being together, whether it's
Hmm.
collaboration, whether it's building the culture, whether it's really being a reason for somebody to stay with their organization
Hmm.
versus go to any organization where they don't need to go to the office anyway. So I think the biggest challenge is, how do we get people to want to return to the office?
Hmm.
Um, and in my experience, I have two organizations, and I'll take one that has extensive culture. We have a culture club. We have cultural goals. We have cultural leaders, and we really believe in the culture of the organization because we've been around 17 years. We've had enough time to really truly focus on it and develop it. And yet still, as amazing as a culture it is, and every employee on the team will acknowledge that, it's still really difficult to get people to want to come back to work more than 2 days a week, because
Yeah.
people have found their autonomy, their schedule. They can save money by getting lunch out of the fridge instead of going to a restaurant and buying it. They can save commuting time and work the same or more than before and not have to be in a car. They can save gas. They can save all sorts of things. So I think that's the biggest challenge. How do you make work a place where people want to be more than just a couple of days a week, if you determine that's something that's really needed and valued in the organization?
So have you seen or enacted or heard of any return to work strategies that work, and maybe some that don't work? Because there is value in being together. People, we were just talking about this last week. People need connectedness. they need to be connected to other people. They need to have the energy of other people. Even those introverts, they don't know it, but they do need to have some personal interactions with people. Gen X, they don't realize it, but working in teams and working side by side with someone, sometimes in the trenches or overcoming challenges in the workplace, creates a bond that you have for the rest of your career. I still talk to individuals that we were in the trenches together and we worked through a situation or we're on a SWAT team together, and we still are connected today. So are there any return to work, I guess, programs, policies, anything that work?
I think you just raised the perfect example and a couple of examples of some of the benefits. So I think one of the strategies that works is letting your team members know these benefits because they may not be thinking of them, whether it's the building of relationships, the more present mentoring, etc. And so that way they understand this isn't a punishment where
Right.
we're making you return to work. This is,
Right.
we really believe in the benefits that will inure to you as an individual if we get you back there. So I think really
Mhm.
communicating the intention behind wanting and needing people to come back. I think also really what we've tried to do, and it has worked, and a number of our clients have as well, is had core days. So employees are required, if they're, say, for example, you have a
Mhm.
workplace where they're required to be there 2 days a week, make sure that those days are core days so that you have critical mass there. Because if you said to employees, for example, you have to pick 2 days to be in, but people are choosing between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, if you work on Saturdays, you could have a fraction of your workplace in every day and you're not really getting the benefits of it. But if you say
Mhm.
everybody in the team needs to be in on Wednesdays and then pick another day from Tuesday or Thursday, then you have full capacity on one day and you have critical mass on the other 2 days. And then you plan something, whether it's a brown bag lunch or something else that's of benefit to employees, you're going to create this energy where people are really going to feel that palpable benefit of being in the office.
Mhm.
And really that's kind of what you need, because then you start this buzz where people are saying, oh, it was so great to be involved in this yesterday or to see these individuals yesterday. And it's one of the things that I've seen work successfully.
I agree. And I think, you know, during the pandemic, particularly women, um, were really doing and continuing to do multiple jobs, but multiple jobs 24 hours a day. And I think most often they're the most burnout at this point and really just want a
Right.
reprieve from driving in, taking the kids to daycare, doing all these things. But at the end of the day, you still have to do your job. And I think it's really difficult to be a mother and work full time all in the same 8-hour day. You know, kids still need their interaction. They still need to be connected as well. So I think it's something that I'll be anxious to see what happens over time and
I,
see how these companies work through it.
I will too. And the companies also need to be careful because we've seen companies who have mandated more days than their employees were comfortable with.
Mhm.
And they've seen attrition
Yes.
because especially this newest generation of employees, they'll use their feet,
Mhm.
and they will walk and they will leave, and some will say, "I'm not going to work for an organization that impinges on my quality of life. I've
Mhm.
seen the light. I'm not
Yes.
going back." And so, my opinion is I always want the most talented, most qualified
Mhm.
team members. And so it's you can't give up on this challenge. We got to figure out how do we keep the best, even if the best don't want to return to the office um, a lot.
I completely agree. Completely agree. And I hopefully they will work through it and they won't make mistakes. But talking of mistakes, while I have you here, post COVID, you know, what are the absolute essentials that HR and employers need to know about the law as they're thinking through kind of their back to work requirements, such as FMLA, FLSA, anything else? What should they keep in mind when it comes to the law?
That's a great question. So take the FLSA or any wage and hour laws for that matter. what employers need to realize is the standard is if you permit somebody to work. So it doesn't mean you've asked them to work till 8 o'clock at night, but you permit them to work, maybe because their manager isn't there to encourage them to go home, or they're not clocking out formally, and they're in a non-exempt position. You need to pay them for that time. So tracking of hours, unless you've got a really good system in place, becomes more challenging, especially for those mid-market or smaller companies who perhaps don't have the same systems in place that the Fortune 500 companies do. So you have to be concerned from a wage and hour perspective. Are your employees working more than you intended them to? And are you paying them for it? Or is that a gap? And if you were audited by the Department of Labor, would it be an issue? Another challenge that we're seeing employers have to deal with is handling requests to work remotely consistently from a disability or a leave perspective. So you may have some employees who say, yes, I know you're trying to return everybody to the office 3 days a week, but I can't. I have a medical condition that prohibits me from returning to the office. And by the way, I've been able to show that I've worked in my job and accomplished what you needed me to for the past 2.5 years. So you're going to have a hard time showing that it's an undue hardship to allow me to continue this way indefinitely. So employers are definitely facing that issue as well. And then you have the morale issue where an employer will grant somebody an exception from returning to the office because of their medical condition or their disability. And you'll have other employees who say, I don't understand why so-and-so gets to work from home every day of the week, but we're required to come in. So these are some of the challenges where you definitely want to make sure you get legal analysis, your either in-house employment counsel or your outsourced employment counsel to weigh in and walk you through the analysis of what you need to be doing under these laws.
Is there anything post related to COVID and kind of the lingering effects? There's always going to be probably that next big illness that's going to come, flu season, whatever medical kind of conditions are going to be impacting the general population. Is there anything in the law from COVID that employers need to think about or HR needs to think about in the future? So flu coming around this fall. Any new laws that should impact the way that they handle HR issues?
Well, absences on account of illness are always something that employers want to be up on because many progressive states, whether it's New York, New Jersey, California, do regularly change their laws related to sickness and health and PTO. And so it's just great regular practice to make sure that your employee handbooks are updated regularly. I know so many of our clients have updated their employee handbooks in the wake of COVID to make sure, for example, if they had unlimited PTO or sick days before, that they really gave more structure to it because of these pandemics and the impact on businesses for those that did not have guidelines. So I would make sure that as an organization, you do a review of your policies if you haven't since COVID occurred, and make sure that especially your leave of absence, PTO, sickness, wellness policies are up to date.
So this administration is probably one of the most progressive, at least for my time, when it comes to protecting the family. And we have the Pump app coming up this summer. We have some other laws, I think, that are that have been implemented. We have the Healthy Workplace Bill that I know, 31 states have talked about it, have proposed it, but nothing really going on there yet. That would give even those individuals who are not within a protected class the ability to sue the employer. So we have a lot going on in the legislative arena. Any tips or tools that you could give HR to keep in mind as these new laws start rolling out?
I would encourage HR, and I say this knowing that HR of any segment of an employer's population is usually the most educated and eager to attend substantive webinars, presentations, conferences, etc. But I would encourage HR to continue to do that because we have seen so much rapid change in the area of employment policies and employment laws. And so you really do need to become a subject matter expert and not rest on your laurels, but continue to increase that base that you have developed in the knowledge of these areas and really increase and expand that base. I mean, the way I look at it is if you're an HR professional, you are going to have a job and a busy job and a challenging job forever because there is so much value that you can add as an HR leader. And it's not just containing risk and managing compliance, but it's also building culture and growing your organization. And I don't think organizations can do it without somebody in HR who is really educated and involved and aware. And just to kind of like put an exclamation point on that, I can tell you even long before I guess it was 15 years ago when we had been in business as an employment law firm, only 2 years. We had 15 people and we brought on a senior sophisticated HR leader, and people looked at us and said, "What? You have 15 people. Why are you hiring somebody in HR?" And we said, "Because this is a big job and it's only going to get bigger." And for most organizations, certainly for us, we are our people. We're only as good as every person on our team.
Right.
And especially in law, you don't have a product other than the product you produce with, with your team members. So I think HR should just do what I've seen them do over the past couple of decades in increasing amounts, and that is stay educated, stay alert, receive webinars, receive invitations to continue to increase your knowledge base. And I think most HR leaders are really doing a great job of that already.
Yeah, just to add one more thing to their plate. One more thing.
I know that's true. It is a busy plate. You're exactly right.
It is. I just think they wear capes. HR wears capes, and they don't get enough credit for it. So stay alert, stay involved, stay educated around the latest regulations and laws. Okay, so we have this thing called rapid fire questions. They're 1-sentence questions that I ask guests, and with 1-sentence answers. Are you willing to play?
I'm willing to play.
All right, let's do it. What are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise?
So one of the bad recommendations that I've heard, and this comes into play more in my role of running an e-learning training company. For those of you who don't know, there are many different states that have different requirements as to what needs to be covered under harassment and discrimination. So some states mandate harassment and discrimination training and tell you what you need to cover in the training. Some advice I've heard is to say, you can apply one state's training to all states' training, as opposed to really looking to see how does New York's training differ from California's training, different from Illinois training, etc. So there's really no one size fits all. And if you do so, you could really end up in a pot of hot water.
What is the biggest problem you or your team solved this last year?
Well, this example, I'm not sure if it is the biggest problem, but it's one of the most common. I have had umpteen companies, HR leaders come to me and say, okay, I want to make a difference with respect to DEI. Which training should I roll out? And from my perspective, I think the answer to that is it's not a one and done. You can't just offer a diversity, equity, and inclusion training and expect that you're going to have evolved your culture. It's really creating a learning journey for an organization so that they can set their employees up for success and educate them each step of the way, whether it's through the combating unconscious bias, building an upstander culture, building an anti-racist culture, developing civility and respect in the workplace. And maybe then that's a really, really good start. But there's no such thing as a one and done. So helping employers realize that has been a problem I've solved time and time again.
What is the biggest challenge businesses are facing today or maybe in the next 5 years?
One of the biggest challenges, and I think it will definitely increase over the next 5 years, is how to embrace and handle uh, the newest generation,
Gen X.
because they have different work standards, and they have different expectations as it relates to DEI. And they are not afraid to, as I mentioned earlier, use their feet and walk if they don't agree with their organization's commitment to DEI or otherwise. So I think that's going to be an increasingly big challenge that employers are facing now and will continue to face.
What's your advice to companies that want to make an impact, a positive impact in this area?
In this area of DEI,
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's to get started now, to really understand the business imperative as well as the moral imperative, and more importantly, communicate that to every stakeholder within the organization so that they understand that by committing to DEI, you're going to be improving your immediate work environment. You're going to be really seeing so many different benefits, whether it's the productivity or the morale I mentioned earlier, whether it's the expansion of your client or customer base, because you will be reaching more customers than you ever did before, and to really communicate those benefits and make sure everybody knows about it, not just those in DEI and those in HR or even the upper echelons of leadership.
What are you currently reading or have read recently that you could recommend?
So I'm currently reading Daniel Kahneman's newer book, Noise. I read his first book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, and it's an excellent book that ties into all sorts of concepts related to our unconscious mind and how our mind works. And I was looking at it from the perspective of, what can I learn about to help my clients combat unconscious bias? And Noise really takes it to another level and really looks at it from another perspective. And I think it's just very insightful, because the more we all know about how our minds work, the more we're going to be able to interrupt either bad decisions we make or biases we have.
Where can people go to learn more about you?
They can Google me or my organization's Shift HR Compliance Training and Nukk-Freeman and Cerra. And I have two really fleshed out websites that talk about all the great things that our team members are doing at both of those organizations. And I'm slipped in there into both of the websites too.
So today we have been joined by Katherin Nukk-Freeman, attorney and co-founder of Nukk-Freeman and Cerra. Thank you again for joining me, Katherin. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully another occasion sometime soon.
I think part 2 is coming. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HRMorning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.